Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Jonathan Dyer. Last name is Dyer. His first name has no H, so it's Jonathan. And he's just published a book in July 2025. And if you're watching this, this is not his first book. If you're watching this on Rumble, X, or Rockfin, you'll see the cover. And the full title is Legendary Evil, The Many Faces of a Mafia Killer. And a really interesting book. A lot of interesting stuff. We were talking in the pre-show about this character, Greg Scarpa, and how interesting and different he was, and maybe some of these other mobsters. But he had quite the life, and he had nicknames. The Grim Reaper, like not really a Mad Hatter. But this is not Jonathan's first book. I will put a link to his Amazon page for his other books. He's also a fiction writer. He spent 3 years during the Cold War living and working in Berlin as a Russian linguist for the Army's Intelligence and Security Command. His experiences in Berlin serve as the background for his Cold War thrillers, the Nick Temple Files, 6 books published to date, and his 21st century thriller, The Holy Lance. He also has written short stories, a novella, and a coming-of-age novel. And then his latest work is this book about Greg Scarpa, Legendary Evil. And he can talk more about that. So, Jonathan Dyer, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, William. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So, for people who haven't heard your name, maybe your other books, maybe you can talk about your career and your book writing career as well, leading up to the publication of this book, Legendary Evil.
Sure. As you mentioned, William, I was in the Army. I enlisted in 1981 and spent about 2 years training, learning Russian, and then doing additional cryptological training at both Goodfellow Air Force Base and the National Security Agency in Fort Meade, Maryland. And then I was shipped overseas for 3 years at Field Station Berlin, where I was an electronic warfare signals intercept operator for the duration. After I was discharged from the Army, I went to law school at UC Davis, and after graduating and passing the California bar, I practiced law for about 10 years. And then after that, I decided to switch careers. I became a teacher, taught U.S. history, government, criminal law. And all of those things together have informed what I've written. Primarily, the Cold War experience informed the Nick Temple Files, and also the one other one you mentioned, the 21st century thriller, The Holy Lance. And drawing on that background helped me to write those. And going way back, I went to a New England boarding school, and that helped me to write my coming-of-age novel. But fast forwarding to more recent work, I was working with a friend of mine, a writing partner, on some scripts about the Mafia in Brooklyn during the 1970s and 1980s, and he suggested I tackle the Greg Scarpa biography. And at first, William, frankly, I was a little bit hesitant. I've been writing fiction for years and wasn't really sure how to go about this. But he pushed gently. He pushed, and I finally relented and said, okay, I'll take a shot at it. And started researching and writing, and about 2 years of researching and then drafting, and then another year of refining, revising, making sure I got things right. And that's where we are today.
You had 2 years of research, and so you got started in this book. Talk about your research, what you looked into. I know there's been other. I know his daughter. You mentioned his daughter wrote a book about him, so he's a really kind of a towering figure in the Mafia. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think he's, for people that know about the Mafia, I think he's one of those types of figures. People find him very interesting. He was certainly a very impactful member of the Mafia, primarily because of his double role as an FBI informant. But the research included lots of reading whatever was already out there with regard to Scarpa. As you mentioned, his daughter wrote a book. One of his closest lieutenants, Larry Mazza, wrote a book, a memoir. His first handler, Anthony Villano, wrote a book called The Brick Agent. And Villano uses pseudonyms for Scarpa, but there's clearly passages in there about Scarpa. And then Peter Lance wrote a book about Scarpa's relationship with Linda Vecchio, the FBI agent who was Scarpa's second handler. And a number of other books were very helpful for me. Selwyn Rabb's massive tome on the five families of New York, for instance, was a great reference. And then just lots and lots of documents, FBI documents, case law, lots of contemporary newspaper articles, magazine articles, whatever I could dig up on Scarpa, and it's quite a bit. And if people would check out the bibliography and the footnotes, it's a fair chunk of the book, frankly.
Right, you got 500 pages, like, in a lot of it, it's the bibliography. But he's kind of an interesting outlier in that he wasn't from Sicily, right? He was part of one of the five families too, right? Not maybe a lesser known family. Would you agree with that?
Well, he was originally a member of the Profaci family when Joe Profaci was still alive, and Scarpa got his button, as they call it, became a good fellow in the early 1950s. And you're right, he was not Sicilian, but the Profaci family apparently did not stand on that particular tradition, and Scarpa became a member of the family in the early 1950s. And then Profaci died in 1962, right around the same time that Scarpa was being approached by the FBI.
And how did that happen? So this wasn't like a short-term relationship that he had. He was more than an informant. I mean, according to some of these other statements, he was more than a mere informant too, right?
Yeah, for a while, he was the FBI's singular source of this information. And that word's used over and over again in the FBI files. And he was approached by some FBI agents who were actually looking for his brother, Sal Scarpa, who was also a good fellow. And they were looking for him in connection with a hijacking. And Greg Scarpa said, see you later, fellows. And apparently he was very polite about it. And it's even noted in the files. But they pursued him for a little while. And Scarpa finally told them, look, you got to leave me alone. People see me talking to you, I'm going to get killed. So they left him alone. And then Scarpa had a change of heart. And he approached the FBI and said, let's start this relationship.
Right, and it's a long-term relationship, but they sent, I mean, according to some figures, some notable figures, they sent him, I mean, you have a chapter with a question mark, is Scarpa a civil rights icon? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's one of the really bizarre things about this story. And it's a story with a lot of bizarre twists and turns. But in 1964, when the civil rights workers went missing down in Philadelphia, Mississippi, this is a subject treated in the film Mississippi Burning. Not Scarpa's involvement, but the overall theme. When those civil rights workers went missing, there was an enormous amount of pressure on the Department of Justice and on President Johnson to at least find the bodies of the civil rights workers. And of course, everybody hoped they were still alive, but they were not particularly hopeful, frankly. And Scarpa traveled down to Mississippi, and we have the statements of his longtime mistress, Linda Shiro, who has pretty consistently talked about a trip to Miami, then Mississippi. And he went down there and used what we would call enhanced interrogation techniques to get the location of the three civil rights workers. And they were found. They were where Scarpa said they were after interrogating one of the local Klan members. And that was 1964, William. In 1966, he kind of reprised his role when Vernon Dahmer was murdered. And Dahmer was a head of the local NAACP, very active in trying to register African Americans to vote. This is after the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And Dahmer was murdered. And once again, the FBI was having a really difficult time trying to crack through the Klan barrier, if you will. And once again, Scarpa was involved. And we have some pretty good testimony about one of the members of the Klan being physically abused to the point where he gave up the information in terms of who was involved. Another thing that I think buttresses the fact that Scarpa was involved in the Vernon Dahmer cases both of those cases, and frankly, an earlier one about Medgar Evers, where I don't think he was involved at all. But the stories that have come down about all three of these cases often include an appliance TV store owner. And the Vernon Dahmer case is the only case where an appliance store owner was actually involved, a guy named Lawrence Bird. And so to me, that lends credibility to the stories about Scarpa being involved, the stories about the enhanced interrogation techniques. And in fact, Bird tried to get his statement suppressed at trial, and then the trial court overruled that. And then the Mississippi Supreme Court didn't really address that issue, but they did note that he had tried to get his confession, there's a 22-page confession, suppressed at trial on the grounds that it was coerced. So Scarpa in both those instances plays a key role in clearing up some really notorious civil rights cases.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect that. He was supposed to be paid too, right? They knew that he could do things that were illegal for the FBI at that time. I think Medgar Evers was killed in April of '63, right before JFK. So it's like a very important time for the civil rights situation, I think. I don't remember when was it 62 was the church burning where the three people died, is that right? I don't remember.
Yeah, I think that was 62, and I think that I'll have to defer. Medgar Evers was murdered in 63.
Okay, 63. Okay.
And there are many reasons I don't think he was involved with the Medgar Evers case, and primarily the holes in the stories about it are just too wide for me to find it's credible.
But it is secretive, and some names that people know, like Sammy the Bull Gravano, this is in your book, and Francis, who's really on social media a lot. These guys were, I don't know what family they were. I think they were from Gotti's crew, but they validated some of these stories. Like, yeah, not in great detail, but they said it did happen. So, and they've been fairly straightforward recently. I mean, they've already done time and stuff like that.
Yeah, those stories have been floating around for a long time, and I always had to be careful about, was some guy just repeating a story he heard third hand, or was there someone that was involved in this that can really give us some good information? And that's one of the reasons I relied a bit on Linda Shiro, because her statements about her participation in the 64 case, the civil rights workers case, have been pretty consistent all the way along. And I find them to be pretty credible.
And he had a very ornate love life, is a way to put it. Can you kind of elaborate on that? He had 6 children, is my understanding.
Yeah, I don't think ornate was one of the first terms that would have come to his own mind, but yeah, he was married to Connie Forrest, and they had 4 children together. They got married in the early 1950s and had 4 children. And at some point, he met Linda Shiro, who at the time was a teenager. Scarpa met her probably in 1962 as well. And he and Shiro were romantically involved while Scarpa was still married. Eventually, he moved his wife to a house in Lakewood, New Jersey. He never divorced her. He never divorced Connie Forrest, and took up full-time residence with Linda Shiro. And he did travel back and forth to Lakewood from time to time to visit with Connie and the kids, but he was full-time with Linda Shiro. He had 2 children by her, and I think readers will be really intrigued about how that came about and what Linda Shiro had in mind with that, and why her name is Shiro and not Scarpa.
Right. I mean, and he was also he wasn't loyal to either of those two either, is my understanding from reading your book. So he was really something else.
Yeah, you're right, William. He was married again while he was still married to Connie Forrest. So he was technically a bigamist. And my sense is that Linda Shiro, at least, was well aware of who Lily DeJohnny, this second concurrent wife, was. But I think Linda was, in a sense, getting what she wanted out of the relationship. And Scarpa was not married to Lily for very long. He divorced her about 2 years into their marriage.
He was known as an earner, so that's kind of why he rose up through the system. Can you talk about his kind of criminal deeds? There were a couple things in there that I was curious about as kind of the bond and stock thefts and stuff like that. I've done shows on kind of the Lusitania, Lufthansa robbery and some of the other kind of criminal people around New York City, of which he was part of. Maybe you could elaborate and talk about that.
Sure, he was. You're right. He was a big earner. He had a crew that was very skilled in a couple of areas, and one of them was bank burglaries. And these burglaries were big payoffs. He also was involved in hijacking of trucks, hijacking merchandise, particularly out at Kennedy Airport. There are stories, one of which I relate in the book, about him bringing home duffel bags full of jewelry. And one of the interesting things about some of these activities is that Scarpa actually increased his earning potential by negotiating, often through the FBI, with the insurance companies. And the insurance companies, rather than having to pay 100% on the claim, were happy to pay 20% and get the merchandise back. And so that was an extra added area of income for Scarpa. And of course, income in the mafia flows upwards, flows from the whoever's getting it through the capo, through the family boss, and then to the boss of bosses. So he was had this reputation as a big earner, and it was certainly well deserved.
Right, and there was a name that you used for him. It wasn't like capo. It was capo regime or something like that. Is that the right term for what his place was?
Yeah, those are the same things. Capo is just short of capo regime. And Scarpa, this is an area that's a little bit unclear, but the way I've come down on this, from what I've read and seen in the documents, Scarpa was a capo in the Profaci regime by the time Joe Profaci died, and he expected to be reappointed as a capo. And apparently a family boss who takes over gets to appoint their own capos. They're kind of middle management. But that didn't happen with Scarpa. What happened instead was he was very close to the Profaci's eventual successor, Joe Colombo. And Scarpa's son, Gregory Jr., has said that this group of about 5 guys, which included Greg Scarpa, that were very close to Joe Colombo, because of that closeness to him, actually had more power in the family than a capo did. So all that time, he's a good fellow. He's not a capo. And then towards the end of the Second Colombo War, he gets appointed as a capo again. And the reason for that is that he was part of this killing crew. He, Jimmy Del Masto, and Larry Mazza. And Larry Mazza and Jimmy Del Masto both earned their buttons, as they say. They became good fellows. And in order to keep that crew together, they had to make Scarpa a capo. Otherwise, they would have had to reappoint Del Masto and Mazzo to somebody else's crew. So they made him a capo, and he was, again, at the end of his career for a few short months.
Right. And so he's not just an earner or moneymaker. He's also a killer who said he admitted to over 20 murders, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. There's a lot out there in terms of people thinking, oh, he did 120 murders, 150 murders. It's, that this is one of the problems with trying to write about this, William, is these guys don't have a press corps following them around, and they don't just have a press conference every time they commit a murder. So it's a little tough to sort out. But yeah, he was known for his viciousness, and there's some just absolutely vicious murders that I chronicle in the book. One that even the mafia, his fellow mafioso, after that happened, said, "We're going to hell for this." He committed many murders during the 1980s, and I've got the 1980s all laid out in the book. And of course, during the Third Colombo War, during the early 1990s, he was responsible or involved in at least four more murders and several attempted murders. I think reasonably the number is somewhere between 20 and 50, but
Wow.
William, it's a guess, but that's a lot of killing.
And you keep mentioning these kind of wars. So there's like war succession issues, guys get old, and there's kind of power struggles within these families. Can you kind of talk about that, expand on that?
Sure. The first one that we really see is after Joe Profaci dies, and there's a, a succession struggle there, and there's some friction between the Gallo members of the Gallo family and the other members of the Profaci family, and that friction comes up again later when Joe Colombo is killed. A lot of people thought Joey Gallo was involved in that, and Joey Gallo is killed the next year. And then in the third Colombo War, the head of the family, Carmine Persico, is in prison, and he's going to be there for the rest of his life, but he still wants to run the family. And one of his capos, Little Vic Arena, decides he'd like to be actual boss. He's named acting boss, so he's street boss while Carmine Persico's in prison. But he decides, this really doesn't make any sense to have a guy in prison running the family. I should run it. And the family splits into these two factions, and there's a shooting war on the streets of Brooklyn.
And there's just a lot of deaths. A lot of disappearings, bodies dropped in the bay, and all kinds of just things like that, like really savage stuff.
Yeah, and at first, frankly, even though it was dangerous for bystanders, the district attorney wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. I mean, of course, he was concerned, people getting killed on the streets of Brooklyn. But I think what really started bringing the heat down, I know what started bringing the heat down on the participants in this war was this killing of this teenager at a bagel shop. And after that, they really got serious about trying to clamp down on these guys.
And he had some kind of special status too, right? Didn't they think at the very beginning in the early 60s, the FBI gave him like a TECI status or something? Can you talk about how these things, it's not a one-way street. They're manipulating each other, right? I mean, it's kind of almost like a Scorpion's dance or something between these guys and the FBI. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's true to an extent, but I really think Scarpa got the better of him. And this is a fascinating thing about the guy. He barely finished high school, and I think he was able to manipulate for years a building full of college-educated men and women. And I think he got the better of him. He was a top echelon criminal informant, and that's the designation you're talking about. And that meant that this was very secretive. There were very few people knew about who he was, what his status was. And he was one of the first top echelon criminal informants when the FBI finally in the early 60s admitted that, there's an organized crime problem in the United States. And Scarpa, during both of his stints from 62 to 75 and then from 80 until his death, had that, from 80 till 92 when he was dropped, he had that designation as a top echelon criminal informant.
Right. And I mean, that's infamously J. Edgar Hoover says there's no secret things until the Kennedys, right? So the 50s, it's not, the Cosa Nostra doesn't exist, right? I mean, it's according to the FBI, is that right? While they have informants. Is it?
Yeah. Hoover was in denial. And I think he didn't know enough about it, wasn't familiar with it. And that's another thing that gave Scarpa a tremendous advantage. In 62, Bobby Kennedy is the attorney general, and John Kennedy makes it clear in speeches on the campaign trail that he's going to go after organized crime, but they didn't know anything about it. And so when you read the FBI documents, time after time again, you see that Scarpa's giving them information that now we just think is routine about the inner workings of the mafia, about the structure, the management structure, the succession structure, what they're doing, what they're involved in. All that stuff was really brand new for the FBI.
Right. They just didn't know what was going on. It's all secretive. This is an initiation. These guys, the maid, the button that you mentioned, they have to go through. It's like a Masonic initiation almost, right? Something like that. Like oaths, promises, if I tell a story, I'll be killed, right?
Yeah, essentially that, there's a bit of blood involved, not very much. But it is a ceremony that is designed to emphasize how important this oath you're taking is, how serious it is. And, the funny thing is that even as early as 1972, Carlo Gambino, the head of the Gambino family, he suspected Scarpa of being an informant, and he told his guys, "Stay away from Scarpa. He's got a big mouth."
Interesting. So they knew he was right.
He was right, yeah. But Scarpa, he another 20 years after that is before he finally goes to prison.
Right, and so his sons, Greg is in prison right now. Greg Jr. is in prison right now for all these racketeering and stuff like that too, right?
No, he got out a couple of years ago on a compassionate release.
Oh.
He spent 33 years in prison, and I believe 4 of those years were in solitary. And Greg renounced the Mafia while he was in, and has said some very powerful things about how he views those years, and I think has a lot of regret. But he's out. He's got throat cancer, I believe.
Oh wow. Scarpa Senior, kind of, people tried to kill him too, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. Is, can you talk about the hits that they tried to get rid of him too, right? He didn't like that.
Yeah, there, especially right there at the beginning of the Third Colombo War, there was an ambush on Scarpa's house in Brooklyn, and I don't want to give too much away here, but it was a very serious attempt. Lots of gunfire right in the streets, right in the morning, the beginning of the business day. They had both ends of the street blocked off, and only one guy got hit with a pellet from a shotgun in the shin, and another guy had a bullet pass through his hair. But other than that, the cars got shot up. But that was for Scarpa. That meant war is war. He's going to war with these guys.
And you write about he had kind of a fastidious character. Like he wasn't. He was organized and thought through things and manipulative, like smart enough to be like a real manipulator. Like those were elements of his character for a guy who didn't have a, traditional education. He was really, he survived all the way up until he got a bad blood transplant, right?
Yeah. I think your point's a good one. The Scarpa was different. His Lieutenant Larry Mazza has talked about how Scarpa's language and his diction was really a cut above most Goodfellas. We have this sort of movie version of these guys. Every other word's an F-bomb. And Scarpa didn't even like to swear. He would use harsh language sometimes, but he pretty much stayed away from swearing. He was a meticulous guy. He had this routine that he went through whenever he washed his hair to get every hair in the right place. He insisted that his men that work for him come to work dressed nicely. He dressed nicely like a businessman every day himself. One of my conclusions is this was a really smart guy. And when you talk about his ability to manipulate people, it just comes up time and time again. And in retrospect, it's like, okay, that's what he was doing. He was manipulating, but he was smart enough to manipulate people with things that he knew would push their buttons, and they weren't really aware that they were being manipulated. So, that sounds kind of silly to say that, but it's a fact.
Right. It's just something about his personality. Like it's really something else. He was like the definition of street smarts, like that kind of thing, the survivability, resilience, all the way to the end. And then instead of like growing old and dying in jail, he got a bad blood transfusion, right? That was one of the...
Yeah, that's just crazy, right? He had this aspirin habit, and he drank scotch and smoked, and one day he needed emergency stomach surgery, and this was right at the sort of the height or the early height of the AIDS epidemic, and there wasn't a lot of information out there. There were a lot of misconceptions, and Scarpa didn't trust the blood supply of the hospital that he was going to get the surgery on, so he told his crew to come down and figured they could find some matches in the crew to provide blood for transfusions that he needed, because he'd lost an enormous amount of blood when he started, his stomach ruptured. And one of the guys was HIV positive. And as a result, Scarpa was HIV positive. But William, here's another fascinating thing. That was 1986, and he didn't pass away till 1994. And constantly, and you may remember this from the text, people were saying, oh, he's only got 4 months. He's got 3 months. 6 months, he's out of here. His T cell count is so high, he's going to die any day now. And years and years went by. And finally, full-blown AIDS is what killed him, but way later than most people would have guessed.
And you went through some of those FBI files, right, about him. How did you find, are those available through FOIA request, or did somebody else grab them?
Yeah, those have been originally were the subject of a FOIA request, not mine. But actually, those are online. The Scarpa files, the Mississippi burning files, and I also accessed the Carmine Persico files. And, once I think the FBI's response has been, once they're out there, we're gonna make them generally available. And so, the Scarpa files, not only his files about being an informant for the FBI, but a couple of bundles of files about criminal activity and that he had been charged with federally were also in those files. So those are all available.
That's amazing. I mean, it's a really great record. Like some of these FOI guys do great work because other researchers can come back through and check it out. I've had the benefit of other people doing that as well. But it is something else. Like, how does the FBI profess like ignorance of this guy's criminality? And they're running him for years. And you said you think he got paid over $100,000 or something like that over time, right? Which is a substantial amount of money.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the FBI, all the way to the top, was aware of the amounts that were being paid, because those had to be approved by Washington, and that was standard for these top guys, top echelon criminal informants. So those payments of $150,000, maybe $160,000 over 25 years of being an informant, it's really not a lot. Again, Anthony Villano thinks that where Scarpa was really making his money was on these insurance payments. And if you put all that together, Villano's was right about that. And you extrapolate over time, I think what he made was closer to $750,000 as a result of his relationship with the FBI. But there's a second prong to this, William. I think what Scarpa was looking for, he loved money. So he's definitely looking for money, but he was also looking for the get out of jail free card. He was looking for protection, and he got that big time.
Another sign of manipulation, successful manipulation of the FBI. Like, you're close enough, but far enough not to be arrested for anything. Like, it's incredible. It's like Whitey Bulger or something like that. Like we talked about The Departed pre-show. Like, just incredible stuff.
It's one of those things where, the old thing about you lie down with dogs, you get fleas, right? And it's one of those things that the FBI saw this as a tool to fight organized crime, and there's supposed to be a line. You don't cross this line, and or don't allow your informant to cross this line. And it's really tough if these guys are having some success, they're building their careers, and maybe shaving something here, cutting a corner there, a blind eye to this, a blind eye to that. Eventually, it adds up.
Right, it really does. And I think that it was like that too. I think that one of the FBI agents crossed the line and was investigated, right, for being kind of too close to Scarpa. Did you remember that or recall that?
Yeah, that's actually covered really well in Peter Lance's book. And it's about Scarpa's second handler, a guy named Lynn DeVecchio. And a number of years after Scarpa passed away, DeVecchio was brought to trial in New York State Trial Court for having been involved in some of the murders that happened primarily during the Third Colombo War. And the allegation was that he provided Scarpa with information about where this guy was going to be. He pulled off some surveillance that would have protected another guy. And so that case went to trial, and the trial was dismissed about halfway through when the star witness in that case, Linda Shiro, was shown to have told a different story to a reporter some years earlier. At that point, the prosecutor moved to dismiss the judge granted that dismissal. And that, in Linda Vecchio's defense, that acts, as you know, you've been to law school, that acts as res judicata on the matter. That's he couldn't be tried again. So yes, there were accusations. There was the beginning of a trial, but it was dismissed. So he is, for all intents and purposes, was not guilty.
Right. I mean, Scarpa's an incredible character. Lesser known, like, some of these other people, Gotti, were more things. I think you even mentioned that in the intro to the book. You kind of juxtapose Gotti with Scarpa because Gotti, like, their funerals were way different, right?
Yeah, and I start at the end, and that was Scarpa had fallen from Mafia grace, if you will. He admitted in open court that he'd been working with the FBI for the better part of 3 decades. And that was it as far as getting any sort of honorific on his way out. And the information that I ran across is that they had to rent the pallbearers for Scarpa's funeral. And so, whereas Gotti had this, what was typical for big shots in the Mafia, and it was nicely portrayed in The Godfather, Coppola's The Godfather.
But Scarpa was wealthy. Like, he had multiple houses, and I mean, he loved money. He had money. So I don't know if he died, or do you have any idea what his estate was like when he died? Because
it's funny. You ask that. There's a couple of attorneys talking to each other here. It's like, we got to get an executor, but I think, there are rumors that he had $20 million stashed in the walls of his home in Brooklyn. Linda Shiro has led not a lavish life by any means in the subsequent years. So it kind of gives the lie to the idea that he died with a lot of money. But he certainly went through a lot of money while he was alive with
wads of cash, payoffs. Who knows who he's paying off to? Like, he could be paying off the FBI for all we know. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't run across that, but it wouldn't surprise me if someone has, and I would not be at all surprised if there wasn't money flowing both ways. But I didn't run across any of that. But he liked brand new cars. He liked fancy jewelry. He liked fancy clothes. He liked taking big trips. He liked nice houses. He was still supporting his first wife on her home, which was a horse farm in New Jersey. So he had a lot of financial obligations, and he had a lot of finances too. And I don't think we'll ever know. He wasn't very dutifully going to his accountant and saying, "We got to file those 1040s this year." So,
right.
Yeah.
But wads of cash, $5,000 in pocket, peeling off bills, almost like a true Mafia figure. Really something else.
Yeah, John, pretty standard for those guys just to have a big Chicago roll.
Yeah, no, it's one of their signs. Like, you can read different Mafia guys; they always have huge wads of cash, untraceable too, right? So, like, you just have it in your pocket. Jonathan, we are at the 38-minute mark. Is there anything you'd like to add or miss? I'm showing on the screen right now. Your book is available on Amazon. You can see the Kindle version, audiobook, paperback, and hardcover. So people can.
Yeah, it's available. If people want to contact the publisher, Wild Blue Press, they can do that. It's probably going to, Barnes and Noble's available. There are a lot of different places that it's available. And, I'd just like to add that through this process, I learned a lot of fascinating things about this guy. Sometimes, William, honestly, I wasn't able to separate fact from fiction. And when that was the case, I was honest about it. And I a few times I just say, I'll have to let the reader make up their own minds about what may or may not have transpired. So I think that there's a little bit of that for the reader to look in there and say, like, well, here's what I think. I think I resolved some issues that have been kind of outstanding about Scarpa. And 38 minutes, naturally, you and I just really skimmed the surface. There's so much about this guy that is both intriguing and repulsive, frankly. So it kept me focused for a couple of years, and I hope readers will be focused as well.
Well, I think that your footnotes really tell the tale because you have tons of footnotes. This is all historical records, FBI documents, very well researched. So people check it out. You also have a website. So I'll put a link to the Amazon page, but your website is your full name, author.com. So it's Jonathan Dyer, no H on the Jonathan Dyer, author.com, correct?
That's correct.
So they can see you there, contact you there, and also you can see your other books. So you haven't just, I mean, you have a number of other books and of different types of genres too. So, and then the Nick Temple files, which are European spy stuff. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Six novel series. So you can check. That seems very timely, seeing that you were a Russian signals intelligence guy, right? I mean, I guess it must be interesting to see the history of the present day from your.
Yeah, it's funny how that stuff has gone in and out of vogue because at the end of the Cold War, when the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union dissolved, it seemed like, okay, well, all you guys who spent 30 years studying the Soviet Union and the Cold War, nobody wants to talk to you now. But for the last several years, with what's been going on in Russia being very similar to how the Soviet Union was conducted, it's once again very timely. So absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, mutually assured destruction. We're there again. I mean, it's incredible. Like, are you fluent in Russian?
No, not anymore. My Russian was very strong, but when I got out of the Army, I went right into law school, and it's a perishable skill, frankly. But if push ever came to shove, I think I could be doing pretty well within 6 months. But I don't think it's going to come to that.
Gotcha. And we had 100 live listeners, so thanks everybody for listening on short notice. Really appreciate it. Go check out Jonathan Dyer's book and his website. I will put show notes in the links. I mean, the links will be in the show notes, excuse me. And the full title of the book we talked about today is Greg Scarpa, Legendary Evil, The Many Faces of a Mafia Killer. And again, the author is Jonathan Dyer, Dyer. So, Jonathan, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, William, really, thanks very much for having me on. Great talk, really interesting, and I sure appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thank you. Stay there. Okay, stay there. I just have to go to